In October 2024, antique dealer Margaret Holloway received what appeared to be an ordinary estate collection from a Victorian home in Salem, Massachusetts. Among the standard items, silver tea sets, china dolls, and weathered furniture, lay a leather-bound photograph album that would soon expose one of New England's most carefully guarded secrets from the Gilded Age. The album had belonged to a prominent merchant family in Salem's bustling port district during the late 1800s. As Holloway carefully examined each photograph, cataloging them for potential sale, one image on page 17 stopped her cold. Two children stood posed in a formal parlor setting, their faces bearing the solemn expressions typical of Victorian-era photography when exposure times required absolute stillness. The boy, approximately 8 years old, wore a dark wool suit with knee-length breeches, while his younger sister was dressed in a pristine white pinafore over a navy dress. Behind them, an ornate mirror reflected the photographer's studio setup, the heavy camera on its wooden tripod, draped curtains, and Victorian furnishings that spoke of a well-appointed middle-class home. Written in careful script beneath the photograph were the names Thomas and Eleanor. October 1899. What should have been a routine cataloging task became something far more sinister when Holloway noticed a disturbing detail that would launch an investigation exposing a network of child trafficking that had operated within Salem's highest social circles. The photograph appeared perfectly normal at first glance, but closer examination revealed something that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about Victorian-era family structures and social respectability. Using a professional magnifying glass, Holloway focused on the ornate mirror positioned behind the two children. The mirror's gilded frame reflected the photographer's studio as expected, showing the large format camera typical of the 1890s and the draped backgrounds common in portrait photography of the era. However, within that reflection lay something deeply troubling. A third face appeared clearly in the mirror's surface, another child, appearing to be roughly the same age as Thomas and Eleanor, but with distinctly different facial features and clothing. Unlike the two primary subjects who were dressed in fine attire, appropriate for a formal portrait session, this child wore simple, worn clothing that suggested a much lower social class. Most disturbing was the child's position and expression. The face appeared in the background of the mirror's reflection, partially obscured by shadows, suggesting the child was standing in a doorway or corner of the room, watching the photography session from a hidden vantage point. The child's expression showed clear signs of distress, wide, frightened eyes, and what appeared to be tear stains on the cheeks. The discovery troubled Holloway immediately. In Victorian-era portrait photography, great care was taken to control every element of the composition. The presence of an unauthorized person, especially a child in distressed condition, would have been highly unusual and professionally unacceptable for a photographer serving Salem's elite families. Holloway contacted Dr. James Patterson, a photography historian at Harvard University who specialized in 19th century social documentation. When she described her finding over the phone, Patterson's response was immediate concern. "What you're describing suggests something was very wrong in that household," he told her. Victorian photographers were meticulous about controlling their environments. Patterson agreed to examine the photograph in person, bringing with him expertise not only in photographic techniques, but also in the social dynamics of late 19th century New England families. Dr. Patterson arrived at Holloway's Boston Antique shop 3 days later, equipped with professional magnification devices and extensive knowledge of Victorian-era portrait photography. His examination began with standard authentication procedures, verifying the photograph's age through paper analysis and studying the photographic techniques used. The results confirmed the image's authenticity. The photograph was indeed from 1899, printed on albumin paper using silver nitrate processes standard for that period. The lighting setup, camera angle, and compositional elements all matched the professional standards of high-end portrait studios serving wealthy New England families. Patterson then focused his attention on the mysterious third child visible in the mirror. Using high-powered magnification, he studied every detail of the hidden face and its positioning within the reflected space. His findings were deeply concerning. This child was deliberately positioned out of direct view of the camera, Patterson observed, adjusting his equipment for different angles. The location suggests someone was trying to keep the child hidden during the photography session, but the mirror inadvertently captured their presence. The clothing differences were particularly significant. While Thomas and Eleanor wore expensive, well-tailored garments appropriate for children of merchant-class families, the hidden child's attire appeared to be simple cotton clothing, possibly even institutional wear common to orphanages or workhouses of the period. Patterson documented the stark contrast in the children's appearances. Thomas and Eleanor appeared well-fed, clean, and comfortable in their formal poses. The hidden child showed signs of malnourishment, poor grooming, and obvious emotional distress. In my 30 years of studying Victorian photography, I've never seen anything quite like this, Patterson admitted. The juxtaposition suggests we're looking at evidence of something the family never intended to document. Patterson recommended expanding the investigation beyond photographic analysis to include historical research into the specific family and their social circumstances during the late 1890s. Dr. Linda Chen, a specialist in Victorian-era social history at Harvard, joined the investigation to identify the family and understand the context surrounding the disturbing photograph. Using the names Thomas and Eleanor and the October 1899 date, she began searching through Salem's municipal records, focusing on wealthy merchant families who would have commissioned professional portraits. Salem's prosperity during the 1890s was built on international trade, with numerous merchant families accumulating significant wealth through imports from the Caribbean, South America, and Europe. These families formed the city's social elite, living in grand houses along Federal Street and Chestnut Street, maintaining strict social hierarchies and carefully curated public images. Chen quote,'s research revealed that several prominent Salem families had employed household staff, including young servants who often came from orphanages or impoverished rural families. The practice of using child labor in affluent households was common but rarely documented, as families preferred to maintain appearances of moral respectability. After examining property records, tax documents, and social registers from the period, Chen identified 3 merchant families with children named Thomas and Eleanor living in Salem during 1899. Cross-referencing this information with business records and social club memberships, she narrowed the search to families wealthy enough to afford professional portrait photography. The breakthrough came when Chen discovered Harrison Stewart's photography studio records preserved in the Salem Historical Society archives. Stewart had been Salem's premier portrait photographer, serving exclusively wealthy families with his high-quality services. Stewart quote,'s business ledger for October 1899 contained an unusual entry. Special family portrait, 2 children, private. Arrangement, $5, double standard rate. Confidential service requested. The elevated fee and notation about confidentiality suggested this was not a routine portrait session. Chen realized that the higher payment and secrecy request indicated the family had specific concerns about the photography session, possibly related to maintaining their public image. Harrison Stewart's detailed business records provided crucial insights into the operations of Salem's most exclusive portrait studio. Stewart had built his reputation serving the city's wealthiest families, and his meticulous record-keeping reflected the professional standards expected by his elite clientele. The October 1899 ledger entries revealed significant information about the mysterious portrait session. Beyond the unusual payment structure and confidentiality request, Stewart had made additional notations that suggested complications during the photography process. A supplementary note dated October 15, 1899, 3 days after the session read, "Delivered prints to family with verbal agreement regarding discretion. Family expressed concern about background elements in final images. Additional payment of $2 received for exclusive service and permanent discretion." Martha Reynolds, the Salem Historical Society's lead archivist, helped Chen interpret Stewart's business practices. Harrison Stewart was known for his absolute professionalism and discretion when serving Salem's elite families, Reynolds explained. The fact that a family paid extra for his silence suggests they were trying to manage a potentially damaging situation. Reynolds revealed that Stewart's studio was located in a converted mansion on Federal Street, with multiple rooms that could be configured for different types of portrait sessions. The studio layout would have made it possible for someone to remain hidden in adjoining rooms while still being visible through reflective surfaces. Stewart's typical portrait setup used natural lighting from large windows, supplemented by strategically placed mirrors to enhance illumination, Reynolds noted. It would have been nearly impossible to control every reflection, especially if someone was moving through the background areas. The Historical Society's records also contain testimonials from Stewart's clients, praising his technical expertise and his ability to maintain confidentiality regarding family matters that might arise during portrait sessions. Chen realized that Stewart had likely witnessed something during the October 1899 session that required additional payment to ensure his silence, suggesting the hidden child's presence was part of a larger situation the family needed to conceal. As Chen delved deeper into Salem's social history during the 1890s, she uncovered a complex network of relationships between wealthy merchant families and the city's various charitable institutions. Many of Salem's elite families served on boards of orphanages, workhouses, and charitable societies, ostensibly as philanthropic efforts, but often with more complicated motivations. The Massachusetts State Archives contained records of child placement programs operating throughout New England during this period. Wealthy families frequently employed children from these institutions as household servants, often under arrangements that blurred the lines between employment, charity, and exploitation. Chen discovered that several Salem merchant families had formal agreements with regional orphanages to provide domestic training opportunities for older children. These arrangements were presented as beneficial to all parties. Families received inexpensive domestic help, while orphaned children supposedly gained valuable work experience and stable housing. However, contemporary accounts from social reformers of the period painted a different picture. Letters and reports from child welfare advocates revealed that many of these placements involved exploitation of vulnerable children, with minimal oversight and no legal protections for the young workers. One particularly disturbing report from 1899, written by a Massachusetts child welfare inspector, documented concerns about merchant families in Salem and surrounding communities who appear to be operating private placement systems outside official oversight. The report specifically mentioned families who maintained multiple children in their households under unclear legal arrangements. Chen realized that the hidden child in the photograph might represent evidence of these illegal placement practices. If wealthy families were essentially trafficking children through unofficial networks, they would have had strong motivations to prevent documentation of their activities. The elevated payment to photographer Harrison Stewart and the family's subsequent withdrawal from Salem society suggested they had been operating such a system and had been caught off guard when their activities were inadvertently documented in what should have been a routine family portrait. Chen quote, "S investigation" expanded to include correspondence between Salem's merchant families and various child welfare institutions across New England. The Massachusetts Historical Society archives contained extensive collections of personal papers from prominent families, many donated decades later by descendants who were unaware of their content's significance. Among these papers, Chen discovered a series of letters exchanged between Salem merchants and operators of orphanages in Boston, Worcester, and rural Massachusetts communities. The correspondence, dating from 1895 to 1902, revealed a systematic network for moving children between institutions and private households. One letter, dated September 1899, just weeks before the mysterious photograph, discussed arrangements for 3 additional placements with suitable Salem families. The letter writer, identified as a representative of a Boston area orphanage, referenced previous successful collaborations and mentioned specific requirements for children who would be appropriate for discrete household integration. Another letter from October 1899, the same month as the photograph, expressed concerns about recent complications and the need for increased caution in all placement activities. The timing suggested that something had gone wrong with the network's operations around the time of the portrait session. Chen discovered that the merchant families involved in this correspondence shared several characteristics. They were all involved in international trade, they all maintained large households with multiple servants, and they all had documented connections to Stewart's photography studio during this period. Most significantly, Chen found evidence that at least 5 Salem merchant families had commissioned portrait sessions with Stewart during the autumn of 1899, all with similar notations about confidentiality and elevated fees. The pattern suggested that Stewart's studio had inadvertently documented evidence of illegal child placement activities, and multiple families had paid extra to ensure their secrets remained hidden. Chen realized she was uncovering not just one family's criminal activity, but an organized network of child trafficking operating within Salem's highest social circles during the late 1890s. Chen quote, S. discovery of the trafficking network prompted her to search for official records that might corroborate the evidence found in private correspondence. The Massachusetts State Archives contained extensive documentation of child welfare investigations from the late 19th century, including reports on illegal placement practices. In November 1899, just weeks after the mysterious photograph session, the Massachusetts State Board of Charities had launched an investigation into irregular child placement practices in Essex County communities. The investigation had been triggered by reports from social reformers who suspected wealthy families were operating outside official oversight. The investigation's preliminary reports, dated December 1899, documented specific concerns about Salem merchant families. Investigators had identified multiple households where children were living under unclear legal arrangements, with no official records of placement or guardianship. One particularly damaging report described a visit to a Federal Street mansion, where investigators found 3 children residing in the household whose legal status could not be determined through official channels. The report noted that the children appeared malnourished and showed signs of emotional distress, but the family claimed they were providing charitable care. The investigation had been abruptly terminated in early 1900, with official records showing that insufficient evidence existed to pursue further action. However, Chen discovered that several prominent Salem families had made substantial donations to state charitable organizations during this same period, suggesting possible influence peddling to end the investigation. More significantly, Chen found documentation showing that Harrison Stewart had been interviewed by state investigators in December 1899. Stewart's statement, preserved in the archived files, claimed he had no knowledge of irregular circumstances in the households of his photography clients. However, Stewart's business records showed that he had received unusually large payments from several Salem families during December 1899 and January 1900, suggesting he had been compensated for his testimony. The official investigation's termination coincided exactly with the period when multiple Salem merchant families withdrew from public social activities, indicating they had been forced to significantly alter their operations to avoid further scrutiny. With evidence of the trafficking network established, Chen focused on identifying the specific child visible in the mirror reflection. She realized that official placement records would have been deliberately obscured, but other documentation might exist that could reveal the child's identity and fate. Chen examined hospital records, school enrollments, and church registers from Salem during the late 1890s, looking for any mention of children associated with the merchant families under investigation. The search required painstaking review of handwritten records, many of which had never been digitized. The breakthrough came in the records of Salem's St. Peter's Episcopal Church, where many of the city's merchant families held membership. The church maintained detailed records of charitable activities, including documentation of children who had been sponsored by congregation members. In October 1899, the church records showed that a child named Michael had been removed from sponsorship arrangements due to family circumstances. The entry was dated October 20th, 1899, just 8 days after the photograph session that had captured his image in the mirror. Further investigation revealed that Michael had been approximately 8 years old, matching the apparent age of the child in the photograph. Church records indicated he had been placed with a Salem merchant family in 1897, but had experienced difficulties adjusting to household expectations. Most troublingly, the records showed that Michael had departed for alternative placement arrangements in October 1899, but no forwarding information was provided. This suggested he had been moved quickly and secretly, possibly to prevent further investigation. Chen discovered that Michael's removal coincided exactly with the state investigation's launch, indicating that families involved in the trafficking network had acted quickly to eliminate evidence of their activities. Additional church records revealed that Michael had been one of at least 12 children who had been relocated from Salem merchant families during the autumn and winter of 1899 to 1900, all during the period when the state investigation was active. The systematic nature of these relocations suggested that the trafficking network had operated with considerable organization and had established procedures for quickly moving children when official scrutiny became too intense. In February 2025, Chen's research team prepared to publish their findings, but they also recognized the need to determine whether any legal action could still be pursued regarding the historical crimes they had uncovered. They consulted with legal experts specializing in historical justice cases and cold case investigations. While the criminal statute of limitations had long expired, the documentation provided valuable evidence for historical justice initiatives and could potentially assist in genealogical research for descendants of the exploited children. Chen worked with victim advocacy organizations to develop a comprehensive report that would honor the memory of Michael and the other children who had been trafficked through Salem's merchant network. The report documented not only the criminal activities but also the systematic cover-up that had allowed the perpetrators to escape accountability. The research revealed that the trafficking network had operated for at least 7 years, from 1895 to 1902, and had involved more than 25 children who had been moved between households and institutions under illegal circumstances. Many of these children had never been officially documented, making them virtually invisible to historical records. The photograph from October 1899 represented a unique piece of evidence, possibly the only visual documentation of a child who had been trapped within this system. Michael's face in the mirror served as testimony to experiences that had been deliberately erased from official records. Modern DNA analysis techniques offered hope for potentially identifying descendants of the trafficked children, which could provide closure for families who had lost track of ancestors during this period. Several genealogical organizations expressed interest in using the research to help reconnect families separated by the criminal network. The investigation's findings were shared with historical societies, museums, and educational institutions throughout New England. The story became part of efforts to acknowledge the darker aspects of Gilded Age prosperity and to recognize the experiences of vulnerable children who had been exploited by wealthy families. The photograph itself was donated to the Salem Historical Society, where it serves as a permanent reminder of Michael and the other children whose stories had been hidden for over a century. The image stands as evidence that even the most carefully constructed facades of respectability can be penetrated by truth, and that justice, though delayed, can still be served through historical recognition and remembrance.